Yeah, thanks. First of all, Sahaj and all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak with this elite development community in Chennai. And also, this brings me back to Chennai after a gap of 26 years. I've been, Tamil Nadu has been close to me. I did my entire education in Coimbatore for 20 years. And then coming back and getting associated, uh, thanks a lot. I would probably drive more on the business aspect, leaving the tech aspect, which is not my cup of tea, to the next panel, which can deep dive and tell you how that is implemented. So pretty much we will start with making it very light for you how that the role of distributed technology has been evolving. Lot of curiosity that's happening in the last 10 years to an extent that I did my startup in 2016 in distributed technology and failed too early in the game. But now I think the technology or the acceptance of use cases using distributed ledger has evolved to an extent that you have startups coming in using these technologies and not only just exploring as a POC, but getting implemented as well, right? The second challenges that was stopping DLT from the next stage was the regulatory standpoint, which gets validated from, at least from an India perspective. If you look, RBI introduction of CBDC itself is a big validation. If you look at SEBI, it's got validation to implement blockchain or distributed ledger technology in most of the capital market firms. So probably I will start slowly without deep diving too much, so that first of all we understand what's the difference between the centralized ledger that we had and what's a distributed ledger. And identifying or knowing this is very critical, because then you will know exactly what use case would fit into the distributed ledger. Because generally what I've seen is people start replicating anything that's on the centralized ledger, try to put it into blockchain, which does not, probably it's a failure, right? So there has to be a cost benefit analysis, because when I look from a banker or from a business standpoint, there has to be business benefit of technology, because finally technology resides behind the end. Like for example, something on NPCI or BHIM, if you look, it made the life ease at ground level. People using a BHIM or UPI does not know what's technology that's going behind. So similarly, technology is an enabler, and if you make life easy for someone who's using, right, that basically brings the adoption too fast. And that's every element to make this to the next level. And probably as regulators have started accepting this, I think there's plenty of use cases to change the world we live using distributed ledger. Yeah, so we'll stay here, right? So how do we distribute, right? So generally when you look at the traditional technologies, hello? Yeah, so generally when you look at the traditional technologies, you have a centralized servers or centralized pool where every information gets, because you don't have a trust on the system. So there's a regulator, there's something who basically regulates everything, and the data resides there. Now, that was basically has been driven from last 25, 30 years, but it had its own shortcomings from a cost perspective, from an implementation perspective. Now, the only element that your centralized ledger had was the trust. And now with distributed ledger, the trust takes care of that. So why should I basically have someone to basically bring the trust element? Now, the difference between a centralized and a distributed ledger is the data resides with every participant who participates in the ledger, which means there's a replica of data that if I do a transaction, the same transaction resides in my database, it resides in your database, it resides everyone who is participating in that particular, what you call as a node, right? Now, what's the advantage of doing that, right? I can probably delete, alter, edit the database that I have control on, but I don't have a control on the database that you hold. So which means that at any point of time, that becomes next to impossible, because any transaction that has to go goes with the majority, right? Because that data should match with everyone who is holding the data. And that's where distributed ledgers comes into picture, where everyone as a collective builds that trust. So any use case there where there's an element of trust becomes a use case for implementation of distributed ledger technology, right? So alternatively, Bitcoin, if you say, right, it's one part of distributed ledger. So probably people interchange between Bitcoin or with distributed ledger, but the technology today, in today's session, we are not going to discuss about the currencies, because as a regulator, I think most of the resistance comes from the currency standpoint, because any country would not allow the financial market to be taken. There has to be some control by the regulator on the money supply in the economy. And that's where that comes. So technology can be enabler, and that's where CBDC, right, has, where a regulator is issuing the same digital currency. Now he has control on the, as we go deeper, probably I'll explain one of each of those use cases. So as we go, as I explained, distributed ledger or data was shared across a public or a private computing network. When we say public or private, a pure DLT believes in public, right? Anyone can enter into a node, can become a participant. But in a BFSI space, you cannot allow anyone to enter because the system can be misused. So in that scenario, what would happen? The concept of how do I use DLT? And that's where the private, basically your private computing network came into place, that I will allow the participants who are relevant to that space. For example, if I'm creating a use case on supply chain finance, why should I be into that node, right? In a normal DLT, anyone can enter and can probably, might be having some spurious intention, right? Could be something, could lead into, in a financial market, into some scams and stuff like that. So to prevent that, you have a private network where I would know what role are you playing. Are you a regulator? Are you a market participant? Are you a stock exchange? Are you a trader, right? So based on the role that you play, you will be invited or be part of that network based on your credibility. And the entire participant in the network would allow you. So that one particular is called as a node in blockchain technology, right? So one node could be an exchange, another node could be a regulator, right? And anything that happens in that particular network has to be approved by everyone participating in that network. And once everyone agrees, then it basically gets passed on. So each computer node in a network holds a copy of ledger, so there's no single point of failure. So no single person or a single node can control the transaction. Every piece of information mathematically encrypted and added as a new block to the chain of historical events. So that's a mathematical formula which is hard to break in, so which brings the element of security into the network. Various consensus protocols are used to validate new block with other participants. So even before adding a new node, the other participants into the system on the network has to approve the new node, what is the validity and should that be a participant into the network or not. This prevents frauds or double spending without requiring a central authority, which means that all the participants themselves becomes a regulator. It's like more like, I would say, in a financial space, you would have heard about the word self-regulatory organizations, right? So as an industry, I do a self-regulatory organization, because if this industry fails, I lose my bread and butter. So even here, I would not like anyone who is basically entering into my network and spoiling the entire industry. And the ledger can be programmed with smart contracts. So what smart contracts? We will see, but smart contracts nothing but a preset rules of logic that gets automatically executed on occurrence of an event, right? A small example could be, let's assume you ordered a parcel on Amazon. As soon as the delivery happens, your payment automatically goes from your wallet or from your bank account to Amazon. So even if you want, you can't stop. So it's basically subject to certain event happening. The other event automatically gets triggered because it's already programmed. And even if you want, you can't stop. Now this becomes a use case in financial market, is something like in supply chain finance or in trade finance. So I would drill down into those use cases. Now this is basically the, when you do a decentralized ledger or DLT, basically transparency, private key for each node. These are most of the features of a DLT, right? Tamper-proof data, timestamp, immutable, and validated data. Now, why DLTs, right? As we have discussed, most of the points are already covered, but just to iterate before we go into the other sessions, the DLT has potential to bring new opportunities and efficiency in financial services. What are the strengths, right? So if you look at a technology perspective, Java has come, .NET has come, C, C++, lot of technologies has come. But the noise that has come with DLT has never happened before. So it's not the technology that's in question. It's the implementation of technology, right? The technology is questioning the regulatory power, right? No one wants to lose the power over the economy. And that's where this is into the discussion, and there's now a ground being created that the regulator itself becomes a participant into the technology so that they don't lose the control. So trust is disseminated, efficiency in broadcasting information, complete traceability of transaction, simplified reconciliation, high resiliency. So if you look at building, when you build even in the traditional technologies, you look at all those stuff, right? Because for any system to work properly, you need to have all this stuff except the first one, right? Trust. So in most of the system, traditional technologies, the trust is taken care by some of the regulatory authority. But in DLT, that is also been independent. It's more like democratizing the entire process. Like I just took a Gartner hype cycle, right? So basically, if people are aware about Gartner hype cycle, any technology that comes, there's an initial excitement towards the technology. Everyone wants to run and implement the technology, create use cases which are not necessary also. And after some time, what happens is people fail, and then they come at a top, and then they say, oh, this is not going to work. And then the disillusionment starts and people stop using the technology. Then as some of those people who are good at that would find a midway to work the technology, finding someone from a domain standpoint, someone from a technology standpoint, that's where the concept of public and private probably blockchain came into picture. Because initially started with public, but then said it's not next to impossible to implement a true block DLT. And that's where private came into picture, that will allow only a certain set of people who are interested in that or plays a role into that. And that's where if you look at DLT, now it's at a stage where it has got matured. Use cases are getting proven, and regulators are also started accepting that this can bring a lot of benefits, and probably the cost of implementing the technology is much more cheaper than your traditional technology. Now, what are the key requirements when you build any systems using DLT? Is basically you should have a strong governance model. So while building your system itself, you need to know what are those inbuilt rules that you need to set in for any new node to be added, for example. For any act that has to be taken into the network, the rules should be predefined. The governance has to be really strong, because if the governance is strong, any system can fail. So that applies to even DLT as well, right? So you have to have strong rules in place that how the entire system is going to perform. You need to have proper data controls, compliance with the regulatory requirements. Again, this was the biggest challenge. Now that they have understood that some of the use cases cannot go without the regulatory compliance, and if that is taken care, then it becomes a big use case. Then standardization. Why do we need standardization? Because this, if has to be spread across the bigger segment of the market, standardization is essential so that anyone can pick up and enter into and start building a new use case, right? Identity framework, security and cyber defense, reliability and scalability. So any of this if is missing, it cannot be a scalable system into place. If the security is missing, BFSI definitely is on any system is not going to accept for any compromise on security. And reliability in the sense that the information should be reliable and available on time and every time whenever you need that information. Now, let us come to the blockchain use cases, right? That's where probably I'm more interested, right? Is one of the beauty about DLT is anything that happens, right, it's automatically recorded. And since you cannot delete or alter in the traditional technology, you can alter and probably rewrite the data. Here it's next to impossible to rewrite the data. So which means that for a banking transaction, all your transaction, even if someone wants to rewrite, you will have your existing data and you will have the next data. So your audit becomes much more important. And so most of the frauds that happen in banks, right, or any financial system is because the data is manipulated. But here the data is next to impossible to manipulate. So that becomes recording your transaction becomes much more easier. And that's where I feel that, like, for example, I gave an example of bank audit. Now, generally I've played a role of an auditor also in the initial part of my career after doing my CFA. It's next to impossible. You are supposed to audit a bank in 1 week's time, right? And you have books that even if you want, you can't find a gap in those audit within 1 week. Now, if you have a system, and I play using this system, right, because those data cannot be altered, I can know exactly where the data is fuzzed. And building a system over and above this, I can probably put an analytics, right, and drive to get insights out of it, where is the element where something has been changed, or it becomes an automated audit system for the banks. And regulatory and compliance reporting. So as of now, what happens is, most of the times goes in preparing those regulatory reports. It's a huge task, right? Getting information from 10 different systems, aggregating those systems, running an analytics over them, and giving in a form that is needed by a regulator, right? So it is a big task, and the cost of not providing that regulatory reports on time, the penalties that are levied by regulators is so high that your DLT becomes a very big use case. Now here automatically when a transaction happens, it gets recorded. You just have, probably in a few seconds, you will have the data at your space. And probably you can automate and give it in the format that a regulator wants on real-time basis, right? Something that you have to create in Excel sheet or some other traditional technology. It can be automated, and in real time the regulator can see what's happening with the institution in its purview. Now this is the most, I think, talked about thing as of now. There are question marks whether CBDC would be successful, non-successful, but even before going whether it's going to be successful or non-successful, we need to understand what is CBDC, right? If you say digital currency, already NPCI or wallets, already your money is in digital format. Now what's the difference between money in wallet and CBDC, right? Any guess from the audience? Yeah. I didn't get by an. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it cannot be unlimited, right? In wallet, you can give points, you can create artificial money. But here it's a true money. So when the money that is created in CBDC is the physical money that is put on hold and against which a digital money is created, right? Which means the money in circulation is in the same amount of money. If the economy has 3 trillion amount of money circulating, and I decide to create 1 trillion of that money in digital format, which means 1 trillion of money from the physical format is not in circulation, against which I have created a token, and that is nothing but CBDC. The only thing is this is done by regulator. So it's not, so the trust is there because the regulator is creating that money. He has control on the supply of money. Now, why should it become a use case? Right? Logically, if you look from a business standpoint, who is going to get benefited? Is it the end customer or the regulator? Regulator, yeah, right. But how? Yes. Yeah. So the cost of printing the notes, the cost of printing the coins is huge, right? Second is the storage, right? The life of a physical currency vis-a-vis life of a digital currency. The third point which I am looking is what's the biggest benefit? Traceability, exactly. In a physical currency, you find a politician having one book bag full of money being dumped into a room, right? You don't have a traceability. Here, I know right from the issuance of the currency, from my regulatory, where and all the currency has moved. I know where the currency is residing as of now, right? So that's a big, right? It prevents black money to an extent, right? It also, something you would have heard, right? Pakistan dumping duplicate notes in India, right? This becomes a very big use case, right? You know exactly how much money supply I have in my country. Where did the money move from a regulator to who's holding the money at the last end node? Now the biggest, now this is from a regulatory perspective. Now from a technology perspective, how it's useful. What was stopping DLT from going to the next level? No interest, regulator was not having control, right? If you look at other currencies like bitcoins or something else, someone else is creating those currency where the regulator does not have the supply on the currency side. Here the regulator has the control on the currency being created. Now this becomes an official currency that I can create a use case on, right? So you will find now all of a sudden there's a growth on use of blockchain or DLT in creating those use cases, because now the underlying currency will become CBDC. The second, this will connect with your fiat money as well. So tomorrow if you say I don't want digital money, you can go to a bank and you can convert this into your physical money as well, right? So the interoperability will be there. Second, this will create those use cases between banks, between all the financial participants, to an extent that it will bring down the cost. At the same time, those TLT which was being delayed for so much time will start getting implemented now. This was the biggest blocker. And if you look at countries like US is already having central currency, India is among the leading nations, I would say, right? From a technology standpoint, implementing CBDC, I think is among the top 5 to 10 nations who has done this and using their own platform. This is a big thing, right? We are not looking at someone else. We have built our own technology which will take care of this. Yeah. Now this is the most favorite use case to me, because this is where you have lot of trust issues, right? If I'm an exporter, for example, right, I have potential market, let's assume in South America. I'm giving a true use case, right? South America exports the maximum commodities, right? Copper, everything from Chile or from Colombia, right? Petroleum from Venezuela. Now the trust issue comes because I don't know whether I export my commodities, will I get my money or not? Now the mechanism that was followed till now was through banks. There would be a bank HSBC in India and a bank HSBC in South America. He becomes a middleman to us, and an LC, right, letter of credit is issued against the goods, which basically means if you give me this document, against it, I will give you the, hello, yeah. So against this, I will give the money to you. Now DLT becomes a very good use case here, right? Because most of the manual work, if you look, right, from getting an order to manufacturing those goods, to exporting those goods, to taking an insurance, shipping those goods, taking delivery at the port, again transportation from the port to the end customer, and then getting the money. In any of this, like, everything is manual and paper, right? To an extent that it was found in one of the data that majority of the scams, right, there are multiple LCs going on for the same product in the system. So I have exported goods, but there are 3 banks who are discounting because I have got 2 duplicate LCs, paper LCs created, against which banks are funded. So tomorrow if I don't pay back, so there's not only one institution, right? 3 institutions will paid against one commodity, one export deal. Now here what happens is everything is into the in the same system, the distributed ledger system, right? Now manipulation cannot happen, because once a deal happens, right from invoicing, the quantity, the price, the buyer, the seller, who will be the bank, who will be the insurance companies, everyone will come in the node. Now, as soon as an insurance company, he knows what's the value of the goods, what's the commodity, who's the buyer, what is credit worthiness, what's the credit worthiness of the buyer, he can give a better insurance on the product, right? Second, buyer's credit worthiness can be done from his historical data. Similarly, seller's historical data can give on the seller side. So if you look at the entire infrastructure is created on the same chain. The bankers knows exactly that whereas on my mobile I can track where my goods have reached. It's still in the ship. It has been delivered, right? So the entire traceability would happen, and the majority of the frauds can be avoided. And I know many of the startups who are already built those use cases and are already working on supply chain and trade finance, because mostly when I started my career, can you guess how many days it used to take for a trade to settle in equity market? This way back in 94 when I started trading. No, it was roughly a month, 4 weeks. So if you do a trade now, it will get settled after 4 weeks. Till that 4 weeks I have, without money, I can keep playing in the market, right? And after 4 weeks, there used to be something called Badla that got replaced with securities lending right now. But what I'm trying to say, technology has got that from 4 weeks to T+2, now they're trying T+1, and sooner they're trying on real-time basis, right? This is only possibly because technology is evolved, right? Now assume if DLT comes into that picture. So even now there are some manual process like risk in the entire capital market space is a big pain, right? But with DLT coming into picture, I know exactly what position you have, how much money you have in the bank, right? I can move my money, right? Now if you have to move your money, you have to transfer money from one bank to another bank, but now with DLT into the picture, all the banks will be into the same system. All exchanges will be in the same system. All participants will be in the same system. Tomorrow I see an opportunity in Forex, my money moves from equity to Forex, from Forex to some other market. So wherever, something like an hedge fund, right? But so the use case on trade finance and supply chain is huge if you look, right? And you will find there's a separate department created by RBI called RBI Innovation Lab, which is potentially doing POCs on all these use cases. And one of the use cases that they have worked on is supply chain, and it's more or less, I would say it's agreed upon. And there's an institution called IBBIC, which is basically creating a trade finance infrastructure. And you know in India, right, once a regulator say nothing doing, just you have to follow this. Automatically banks will be forced to put their LCs on the system, and you will find that everything will be on your system. So this is the biggest use case I feel, the low hanging fruit. So trade finance and supply chain, this streamlines the various paperwork involved in international trade and reduce the risk of fraud. Now why do I say international trade? Because trade itself is risky. But if it's international trade, what's the additional risk that gets added? It's the element of country risk as well, right? Tomorrow if I do an export to, let's assume, an enemy country, right? Now once the regulation remains same within the country. Once your goods moves out of the country's regulation, your country does not have a control on that, right? So if the goods are in the ship, it's in no man's land. If the goods as soon as reaches the other country's laws comes into play. But with DLT and countries accepting DLTs, what would happen is everyone will be on the same page. Your governance will become much more easier. Transparency will be there in the system. Tax evasion will be lower. One of the biggest challenge in trade finance is overpricing of goods, right? So let's assume this is worth 10 rupees. Now I would price it as 100 rupees and sell it to someone. 90 rupees is nothing but black money, right? But now that would not happen because the regulator, everyone knows that this price is 10 rupees, how is he pricing at 100 rupees? So this actually will bring lot of transparency and manage the document needed for completing a trade transaction, including contracts, letter of credit, bills of lading. So just for the sake of, these are the different documents that's used in international trade. And it's a huge list of documents. Those has to be tallied. So if it's a physical format, you have to tally all the information has to be the same. right? By digitizing this paperwork and making it available on shared ledger, all parties can see what's happening in real time and know that the data is secure from tampering or fraud. Now, another being into the as a fund manager, as an interbank broker dealer, how many of you have invested in fixed income directly into a government securities? Might be almost nil, right? Even including me, I have not invested, because the market size that when I used to deal was 5 crores, now it's 25 crores, right? A single ticket size. So which means that a segment of the market is not available to the retail investor, right? Now with syndicated loans, what happens is I buy a 25 crore market, a lot, break it down into tokens, smaller chain into a DLT, and then make it available in 10,000 rupees to you. Now, nothing is fictitious, because the paper against which I am creating these tokens is issued by the regulatory authority or by the banks regulated by RBI. Now that becomes a use case. It's allowing you to participate into a segment which was not available to you. So you break down into smaller chunk. It's nothing but, in financial term, we used to call this as a securitization, right? So securitization was smaller into bigger. Now we are saying bigger into smaller, so that a retail participation can come into this picture. So syndicated loans means basically many people coming into, so the other use case of this would be the other way, right? Let's assume there's a project that's going on which you want to participate. It's a big ticket project, right? 100 crores worth project coming in, let's assume this a part of the city, but you have just 10 lakh rupee to invest. Now you can buy token worth 10 lakh rupees, but this will get accumulated within the ledger and gets invested there. Now authentication, again, there are many startups which are using this for digital KYC, right? Now identity verification is a big problem. How do you know that I am Anil Agarwal, right? So with DLTs, I will have a unique ID. Identifying my documents becomes much more easier in DLT, because that cannot be manipulated, right? So your online digital KYC becomes much more relevant now, much more tamper proof, I would say, rather than what it used to happen in the centralized ledger. So authentication actually is being, I would say, already being use cases being implemented into KYC. Everyone was waiting into from the regulator perspective. Now once you get a green signal from the regulator, you will find lot of companies coming into this area and implementing this technology. Now tracking asset is basically, again, the example that I gave for loan syndication, right? So something you would have seen, I think arts has already taken place, right? You see a painting worth some 25 crores by M.F. Hussain, right? You can't participate there. So those use cases have become, it's being live, right? Why? Because there's no regulation there. So you had bitcoins and then you did a valuation of that, and that got into tokenized, and now you can invest into that painting, a part of a fraction of that painting, right? Because that was outside the purview of BFSI space, of a regulator space, you were able to create that as a product. Now with regulator allowing CBDC or his pro implementation of DLT, now this use cases will see the day of the life, right? It will be basically something like investing in mutual funds, right? Or big ticket, like for example, I would say private equity, for example, right? So private equity is something, right, worth one deal size 300 crores, right? A structured deal that no one comes to know. I do a deal with someone and I structure the deal, but now I can structure a deal with tokenizing that assets and selling the token to public, right? So I get the 300 crores from you and do a deal, and you participate in the market that was not available to you. So this is expected. So tokenization already is getting implemented in BFSI itself. So 16.1 trillion tokenization market by 2013 is what is projected by BCG and ADDX. Minimum areas like green finance, right? So using DLT, you can put those conditions where should my money be used. So it could be, for example, I can give an example of Jain community, for example, right? they don't invest into, let's assume, non-vegetarian, right, non-veg companies, right. For example, one of my friends does not invest in leather industries because that involves killing animals and getting the leather out of their skin, right. So you can build those into a DLT, that where should be my end use of fund should be there. And your funds, even if someone wants to invest, it will not get invested because that's breaching the contract there. So it will get invested only when it meets the criteria set by you. And this is, I would say, last 10 years I've been seeing most of the international banks have already taken a lead in global payments. So JP Morgan already has implemented its system on global payments. So any idea, if let's assume you have funds in US, or if you have company has given you ESOPs, you sell your ESOPs in US, and if you have to get your money back, how much time it takes? Huh? Yeah, it started happening now, but at least when I got my ESOPs, it took 1 week from the day I sold my shares to getting my money in my account. But now with DLT, it can happen in few seconds, right? Because everything is linked in the same node. So you're assuming everyone is in the same node, right? So your stock exchanges, your payment providers, everyone. So what happens is your money from whatever shares are sold comes to the bank account and directly gets credited in your account, right? And whatever those conditions, country level regulations, everything is built into the your system so that none of them are violated. So banks can store, access and update data on a secure digital ledger. This makes easier for multiple parties to view, share information, eliminating the need for manual matching data across multiple databases. Payment across countries can be completed in minutes rather than days, and a fraction of cost typically associated with international payments. Ensures an additional layer of security compared to the traditional payment platforms. Now the cost was also a big element, right? So every 1,000 rupees they used to charge 25 rupees for global payments. So if you are selling, if you have got ESOPs, most of the time the money goes in your transaction cost itself. But this will reduce entirely the transaction cost because the need was there. The Indian banks did not have a counter presence in global markets, so you have to pay a fee to a global market to transfer that money from there to here. Now with DLT, it becomes much more easier for everyone to have presence across the world. Now we did speak about till now all the good things about DLT, but there are of course challenges as any technology has, right? So one of the biggest challenges that was, I would say, is come down was the legal, right? From a regulatory standpoint, it was a big bottleneck. On acceptability, something like a undistributed, right, where the regulator says, we are saying the regulator that you don't have any control, right? I'll do what I want. But generally in a financial market, that's not going to, so that's one is taken care as of now, but there will be some, as it gets mature, most of these things will get sorted out. Integrating with the existing legal infrastructure. This is my biggest worry because banks have spent so much money on their existing infrastructure. Now asking them to now move to DLT will be a challenge. So what could be the solution is that need to build some interface that basically speaks with your traditional systems and also with DLT, right? So that you need not change your entire technology that you have invested for several years. And some problems are better resolved. So again, all use cases cannot be DLT use cases, right? There could be something that works beautifully in your centralized ledger. That it's no use, right? You need to do a cost benefit analysis. Really that is a use case for DLT or not. So most of the startups have failed there because they felt that anything that is being done in traditional technology can be lifted and shifted to the distributed DLT technology, which is not true. Some of the stuff, because DLT is a huge data network, so the cost generally has to be evaluated against the benefits that you get of implementing a DLT technology. So something like global payments, the cost is higher, it makes sense, right? But UPI, for example, if it's already there at a cheaper cost, why should I change something which is already working, right? But if DLT brings additional benefit, or let's assume it takes you to the rural level or something, right? As we mature more, we'll find more use cases which we are not even thinking of now, because technology is evolving, and as technology is evolving, business use cases will also get evolved. Now, I did some of the use cases are being already implemented by some startups, some companies, right? So Gartner predicts blockchain could generate as much as 3.1 trillion in new business value by 2030. So this actually, if you look at Gartner reports, sometime I would say 2013, they said mobile is going to be the future of banking. And we underplayed, saying that no, what would happen to security, right? What happens if someone steals away my money? But now if you look, majority of your banking happens through mobile banking, right? It moved from net banking, so people are not even willing to open an application on your laptop. They want everything on your mobile, right? Same with stock trading. It started with your desktop application. So people now want to trade on mobile, right? It's become like a game, like Robinhood you would have seen, right? So during COVID, I think it hit all the barriers on the trading side. So what technology can do, I think, is unimaginable, right? And as time evolves, technology matures, and it becomes much more practical to implement. As I speak, I know I've tied up with few Bangalore-based fintechs who have already developed solution, not only developed solution in supply chain or trade finance, or getting implemented in banks, right? So it is no more I would say new, it's already happening as we speak. So Trade, as I said, this TRADLE, Tradle is a company in US which basically does digital KYC using DLT, right? Trade finance using DLT in blockchain, right? This is what I mentioned about the last one is IBBIC, which I mentioned. So they are already implementing a trade finance solution. So this is a consortium formed by 14 Indian banks. It started with 4, and as now it has been approved by RBI, now other banks have joined and it becomes a consortium, which means all the 14 banks will be in the node and they will be using this application for their trade finance, right? And Bankes is a digital asset banking platform using tokenization. I just gave a few feel of this. There are plenty, right? The slides could be endless. There are plenty of solutions already available in the market, and pretty much I think I am able to do justice to your time on a Friday evening, coming here and listening to me. That's from my side. Thanks a lot.